This is Today's Business Leaders. Actionable advice from real-world professionals. And now here's your host, Gabe Arnold.
All right, on today's show, I have Michael Roderick, and we are going to talk about entrepreneurship and communication and a little bit about what's going on in the world today, probably as well.
Yeah.
Michael and I connected on actually a nice event that Julie had put on, and then we are also in the same mastermind. We realized as well that I think that all kind of happened at once. So I'm really glad that we have you on the show today, Michael.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. This should be a lot of fun.
Awesome. So start out the way I always do, because this leads to some great revelations, at least for me, and I think for the audience too. And that is, when did you first realize that you're an entrepreneur?
Wow. I think without even knowing what the word was, I probably realized it in high school, because my school had an English department that was kind of underfunded, and a sports department that was like overfunded. And I ended up putting together a battle of the bands, because I had a band and in our high school's auditorium, and like worked out all of the logistics, like took care of figuring out like what security do we need, like what laws do we need to follow and everything, all to raise money for our school's English department. So I think that was where I started to realize, oh, wait a second, you're the kind of person who like gets things together.
Yeah, that's cool. So very early on, and definitely with the right intention of like problem solving and serving people that needed help. That's awesome. That's very cool. I was in Battle of the Bands in my teens, but I never put one together. And I have a friend who now that's what he does. He's a manager of bands and events.
Oh my God, I love that. Very, very.
So there's is where you kind of realize like, oh, I have this skill or interest at least, or ability. Take us from there to where you are today. Give us the relatively short version of like how it kind of progressed from there to what you've.
Yeah. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version, because I've lived probably 17, 20 different lives through all of that.
Yep.
So from there in college, I studied theater, but I also studied secondary ed English. So I was a double major, and spent a lot of time even there just trying to sort of find more opportunities for people in the theater department, and put on a lot of my own events, wrote my own plays, directed, produced. Then I got two offers from a teaching standpoint, one in my old high school to go back and be a teacher there, and one in New York to teach at an all-boys Catholic high school on the Lower East Side. And this is actually where the name of my company came from, because all of my friends said, hey, Mike, you're a big fish in a small pond here in Rhode Island. You go to New York and nobody's going to know you. And I said, I'm going to go to New York. I'm going to create my own small pond. And that's what I did. I started out, I was teaching high school, running a theater company at the same time, eventually got to the point where I was building a lot of relationships with folks on the Broadway side of things. And I went from being a high school English teacher to a Broadway producer in under 2 years. So a lot of people were really curious as to how that happened. So I decided to study networking. So I started hosting workshops where I would simulate networking experiences. So I'd have people act out one-on-one meetings, job interviews, and cocktail parties. And I started to notice a lot of patterns. And from those patterns, I developed frameworks, taught a bunch of those frameworks to artists, helping them to get to the next level of their careers. That led to people in the business world approaching me. Then I became kind of known in this like relationship building sort of connector space. I ran a conference for a couple of years called ConnectorCon. And I would say about 3 or 4 years back, right around the time my first child was born, I had a moment where I was seeing a trend in the relationship building space where there were a lot of sort of sketchy characters kind of coming into it. And I realized that from a business standpoint, it wasn't going to really work. So I decided to shift my focus and apply all of my relationship building knowledge to the world of thought leadership, and I developed this concept of creating a referable brand, where you help people package their ideas in such a way that people will talk about you when you're not there. And that's really where the work has led me to. And now a lot of my work is helping these thoughtful givers, people that are really good at supporting and helping others, become thought leaders by stopping denying their intellectual property. A lot of times it gets deprioritized because we're so busy working with other people. But if you take the time to really package your stuff, that can then become your legacy. So I love helping entrepreneurs with that. And like I said, super quick, like 30,000 foot view, if you will. But yeah, those are some of the touch points of the crazy journey I've been on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm glad that you shared that, because I think that some of the unique parts of it that stand out for me is like, you're kind of like in education and art, and yet you figured out how to be a successful entrepreneur. And those are not like the first things that come to mind when somebody says, oh, I'm an artist, or like I run a theater company. And like to then become successful and get on Broadway in 2 years, that's incredible. I mean, that's different, because I've seen plenty of, like before we started, I was telling you about a friend of mine. I've seen plenty of my friends who have taken years just to figure out how to create a business out of their art. Or out of what they focused on. And so I'm curious, like what was the realization, or what was the inherent thing that you had that made you be able to go from high school teacher to, writing, being on Broadway, producing there, to starting businesses? Like that's a different path than most people I've had on the show.
Yeah. I think it's this aspect of, and it goes all the way back to my teaching days. One of the things that we learned as teachers was to plan, act, and reflect. So you would plan a lesson, then you would act on it, and then afterwards you would sit down and say what worked and what didn't, and you'd start to look at like what are the patterns and how should I treat this class versus this class and things like that. And I think my strength is often in that reflection piece, where I'm able to look at things and say, okay, what's missing here? What's not being said? I've often referred to this as in literary criticism, there's a type of criticism referred to as Marxist criticism, where what you do is you read a book and you look for what they call the gaps and the silences. So you basically read to see what are people not mentioning. And then that tells you all of this really, really interesting stuff about the time period and like why the story was even written and all of these things. So I've always kind of taken this, like, look at the gaps and the silences in an industry. And with Broadway in particular, one of those gaps was the way that people become producers. So often the way that you become a producer is you go to another producer and you say, I will raise this amount of money for you in order to get this credit. So you're going to another producer and saying, I'm going to raise this amount to get this Broadway credit, be an associate producer, lead producer, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And when I realized that that was what so many people cared about, I took that off the table. And I just went to producers and I said, I want to get better at raising money. I just want to like understand this process. So I don't care about my name being on it. I just want deal flow. And what happened was a lot of producers were like, wait, great, no skit. Like, I don't have to worry about figuring out how to cut you in on the deal or do any of these things. So I ended up with this portfolio of plays. So I was able to go to investors as if I were a VC and be like, which do you want? As opposed to, here's this one show that I'm really hoping makes it.
Very cool. That's interesting. Yeah, it's definitely, I have only just, to be honest, like recently in the last couple of years, realized like the power of reflection and just sitting back and like thinking about what happened, what worked, what didn't work. That's something that I think is a really interesting key. And another guest that I had on the show, Miha, I can never say his last name, Medlatsky, I think. Like I said before, that's not my skill in life, is last names. But anyway, he runs a program called Framework for Freedom. People can look that up. But One of the things that he pointed out to me early on is like, if you set aside weekly reflection time, you'll grow your business faster. And like, I don't think that that's culturally talked about in entrepreneurial circles at all, at the level that it should be. And I just think that's really powerful. So that's really interesting that that's, what has helped you uncover these things. And the other thing that I find really interesting is that you're talking about like the communication end of things and figuring that aspect out. What do you think are the keys that you've seen over the years? Obviously, you've built a whole business around this and had your conference, and now we're now focused on the referable brands. Can you kind of walk us through how you discovered that, and then kind of also talk about what it is that you do from the referable brand standpoint?
Sure. So how I discovered or sort of happened upon the referable brand idea, and then sort of break down the idea a little bit.
Yeah.
Sure. So basically what I started to notice when I was actually looking at the patterns and sort of the industry of thought leadership was that the driving force for most people was this idea of being different. So you had all of these different people out there teaching courses and programs and focusing on this idea of here's how to be different. But what happened was so many people started teaching other people how to be different and using formulas instead of frameworks, where it was like, use my tool or like say my words, that everybody's different now started to sound the same.
Yeah.
So when I saw that, I said, okay, if we can't cut through the noise that way, right? If we're starting to sort of hit this point where the market's just too sophisticated and difference really isn't cutting it as much anymore, what still cuts through the noise? And then I thought about my own journey, and I realized that every opportunity I've ever had has come from my referability and the fact that people talk about me when I'm not there.
Yeah.
So every time I've gotten an intro or somebody has come to me and said, I want to have you on my show, or I want to do this, etc., it's come from they were talking to somebody else. That person told them one of my ideas or one of my things, and then they said, oh my God, I need to talk to him.
Yeah.
So I was teaching one of my relationship building workshops, and I decided to take about 15 minutes to just tell them this short idea. And at the time, it was literally just, I'm not even sure if this matters, but I think that the reason I get in a lot of the doors I get into is because people talk about me because I make my ideas easier to remember. Was sort of the like general gist. And I started talking about it and sort of breaking it down. And then there was a mastermind portion at the end of that workshop, and everybody requested referable brand for their hot seat.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, there's something here. So once I saw that, I figured, okay, there needs to be a framework built around it. And most importantly, the framework has to prove the thesis.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't, it's going to be kind of hard to do this, right? So the framework that I came up with was, I call it taking aim. And that's AIM. And that's accessibility, influence, and memory. So the first principle of a referable brand is accessibility, where if people outside of your industry don't get it because you're using lots of jargon, there is a very, very good chance that your message will not spread beyond your industry, and you'll be stuck in what I call the echo chamber of the enlightened.
Yeah.
Where everybody just kind of like already knows those words, so you're just kind of another person shouting into the midst of, of that group, right? Yeah. So that was sort of the first hurdle. And then I started to think about this idea of influence. And there's been a lot of writing on the idea of influence from the standpoint of like, these are persuasion techniques and how you do this. And Robert Cialdini has tons of really great information on that. But when I started to look at what was probably the most influential in terms of something being shared, I realized that the thing that gets something shared is not about how good you've made it, but how good it makes somebody else look. Yeah. So when I started to like look at that, I I started thinking about, okay, how do you package the idea in a way that if somebody else shares it, they look cool? And the example I often use is the Start With Why talk that ended up just kind of blowing up, right? Yeah. And if you look at that talk, there's one very, very simple principle in it where you draw the bullseye and you put why in the center. And if you're at a party or if you're out with your friends, you look like a genius. So of course, that's going to be shared more. That's going to be more influential because people easily share it. And because we don't want to look stupid, right? So like, we're never going to take somebody's 32 points of something and try to explain them, right? We're going to explain their 3-step, 4-step process, right? We're going to, and we're only going to do it if it makes us look good, right? So there's always some sort of reward that happens for us sharing something. Sometimes it's an emotional reward. Sometimes it's a, hey, everybody else thinks we look cool kind of thing. But even if you've accomplished these two things, the danger is that whoever is supposed to transfer the information won't remember it. So I landed on memory. And basically, there are ways that we can make something easier for people to remember. There's all sorts of little techniques that we can use to make something memorable. So what I did was I started to look at how do we start to create more memory markers, because it's not about how well you tell the story. Mm-hmm. It's about how easy it is for other people to retell the story.
Yeah.
So you do that, more and more people are going to share it, more and more things are going to happen. And if you execute on these things really, really well, what happens is you get the opportunity to, I call it being Prometheus, where basically you can walk into another industry and have that industry accept you without new kid syndrome. Because you've taken the time to package this in such a way that they already get it. They already think it's cool. It's going to make them look cool. So everything's going to be great. And you cross over into enough industries, you're going to be top of mind for so many people. And all of a sudden your brand, your ideas, they're just going to be on everybody's lips.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Thank you.
Sure.
And I love how you package it up, and it's memorable and easy to understand. So it's accessible, influence, and memorable, right? It's AIM.
Yep.
Game.
Yep.
I build little things like that too to help me remember things. So I always like those.
Yeah.
One of the things that comes to mind is, like, I think there's plenty of people that have built up a really good product or service. Like, they really deliver quality, and so they've solved half of the entrepreneurial equation, right? Or some of it at least.
Yeah.
But then if they stumble upon this, then I guess a question that comes to mind for me, because some of my stuff is not memorable at all, is it a massive, like, recut of everything you do? Or is it really just kind of a top layer change that makes what you do, fall into the AIM model? What's the effort like there?
Yeah, I really do think it's about, if you don't have a big idea that ties to like who you really are, mm-hmm. you got to start there. I always call that question 0. So you got to start from the aspect of like, why are you doing this? So whatever you've built is like, that's your entrepreneurial venture, right? Like, why do you even care? And like, what are you doing for the rest of the world?
Yeah.
Once you have that understanding, you usually have a big idea. Mm-hmm. But the problem is most big ideas are not sexy.
Yeah.
Right? Most big ideas are clunky, fumbly. You can't quite get it. Somebody spends half an hour trying to explain it to you. It just like doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I would say the starting point is always, you got to start with your big idea and then say, okay, what is the framework, the simple thing that helps people understand my big idea? Mm-hmm. Once you've done that, you can start looking at any of your products, services, and offers and start asking yourself, which of these areas is this thing falling down on? Mm-hmm. And in many cases, a product isn't selling not because it's not a good product. It's not selling because there's confusion, about what the product's actually going to do for somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. And what this does is it gives you the tools to start to think about that, right? To start to think about, okay, how do I make this idea accessible to people who don't know as much as I do? Right. That's one of the best things, like you can make such great copy by basically just being like, wait a second, let me stop thinking about me and talk to other people about their pain, right? And they give you the words for your copy. And then, the other aspect is, what result could I get for somebody that they would then want to go and tell other people that they got that result specifically by using this process? Because if they do, people are just going to keep coming to you and thinking about you, right? And then from the memory standpoint, if you're trying to sell a product, people need to remember the name of it.
Yeah.
Right? Because if they're going to go back and they're going to try to find whatever that thing is, and if they don't remember the name of it, it's going to be really, really hard. There's a reason that there's a children's book called Llama Llama Mad at Mama and not a packet Mad at
Mama. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think what's brilliant is, I think as a copywriter, I understand this at some level, but you just kind of really helped me understand it at a different level. Is when you talk about the influence piece of this, it's about making that person look good. And so if we think about like what we share on social media or what we post about or what we talk about, it is all about like, oh, look, I'm so smart, so I'm going to share this article, or I'm so funny, so I'm going to share this meme, like it's mine or whatever. That's what causes the spread or the virality. And that's something that just, to be honest, I never really thought about at that depth with how our ego ties in. And ego is ego. It's not good or bad. It can be used for good or bad, in my opinion. Yeah. But if you understand it, then you can show up for people in a different way. And that's really
and that was very much when I was raising money. That was how I raised money, because I looked at what was the reward that somebody was going to get as a result of investing in a show, and different people had different interests in terms of the reward. Most people had no interest in the monetary reward. They just wanted to be at an opening night party with Green Day. Or they were in a job that they just hated, and they wanted something to be able to brag to their friends about. Right. They wanted to show that they were doing something interesting. Like there were all these different motivations. So if you take the time to think about like, what are those motivations? What are those things that give people that reward for sharing? And you start to build that into your content, you are significantly more likely to have your content shared.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely the key. And yeah, I mean, anytime you watch a successful ad campaign or you see something really take off, I believe it definitely really has those components, and that's super interesting. And so what type of businesses or entrepreneurs or thought leaders do you work with? Have you found this framework is applicable virtually everywhere, or is there an area that you specialize in that you help people with?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I've worked with a lot of different industries. I've worked with folks in tech, and I've worked with folks in the arts, and I've worked with folks in more of this sort of like personal development, entrepreneurship space. Where I feel it works best is the solopreneur, is the person who's making a living with their ideas.
Gotcha.
Because if you've got, if you're running a team of like 15, 20 people, and you're really dealing with more like operational efficiency and all these different types of things, yes, this stuff will help you, but chances are it's not your priority, right? Unless you're rolling out, let's say, if you're rolling out a new product, maybe, then it could be something really, really useful for you. But the people who spend the most time on this are the solopreneurs, because if they're able to package their stuff in this way, it instantly increases their value in the market. So they can stop selling that course for $100 and start selling it for $500 or $1,000 if they repackage it in this particular model, because then they're clarifying the value for other people, right?
Yeah.
Most of the time they're selling low because they're competing on price, as opposed to actually looking at what is this thing going to actually do for somebody. And if you
Yeah.
can articulate that and people can see like, oh, this will either save me time, or this will help me make money, or this will, help me feel better about my life, and you really clarify that, then the price points always go up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a good point. Yeah, that makes definitely a sense for speakers, authors, like that kind of, like you said, the solo prayer. But yeah, but also like, I mean, I've already just learned a ton about we're rolling out a new product, and I'm like, oh, this is stuff I can adjust in what we're doing there, because it's super cool. That's awesome.
Awesome.
Excellent. What do you think, like, have you seen, just to shift a little bit to kind of current times and what we're experiencing now as we're recording this, you're in New York City. And so you've seen a lot there. What do you think what you do, or let me ask it a little better. How do you think what you do affects people in today's climate? Because I don't think this is going to be the first, unfortunately, I don't think this is going to be the first catastrophic thing we're going to experience. And these things may happen more frequently. So how does understanding, creating these memorable ideas, how does that affect us moving forward? Or what have you seen, as you're a guy like me that likes to reflect on things? What are you seeing like in the current climate? And then how do you think what you offer kind of fits into that? I'm curious.
Yeah. So basically, if we look at it from a copywriting standpoint, and we go all the way back to, Gene Schwartz talking about market sophistication, right? And the fact that as more and more people see the message has to get clearer, and all of a sudden a 50-cent ad has to turn into a sales page, has to turn into a 12 or 15-page sales page. Right now, the internet is that like sales page scenario, right? So right now, the internet is likely in the space of, I think we're maybe a page long sales page right now with like decent headlines. But what's going to happen is everybody's going to have to start getting much better headlines, and everybody's going to have to start getting much longer sales pages, right? If you really think about it, because what's happening is all these people are coming online. And now, even with whatever changes happen, so even if there are, we're in this for the long haul, or we're in this for a short block of time, the Pandora's box has been opened in regards to people understanding that they can do this online.
Yeah.
Which means the market is going to be super, super saturated. So when the market becomes super saturated, people basically now need ways to filter and figure out, like, what should I go to? What should I use? What should I pay attention to? So just like I had talked about with Simon Sinek and the TED Talk side of things, right? There's top 10 TED Talks, but there's so many TED Talks out there, right? There's only a handful that you remember. And if you think about the ones that you remember, they usually have some nugget that you share with somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? So the more that we think about this now, the better prepared we're going to be once people start coming out of the woodwork and doing the same type of stuff we're doing, or putting the same type of stuff we're out there, even if they're not as researched, even if they don't know as much, right? And if that flood happens and you're prepped with your own thing, you're going to be more likely to like build your own following. And the other thing that I think is really, really important that I think is going to happen, we're going to be even more hungry for the mavens, for the curators, right? The people who are able to tell us this is valuable and this is not. And when I think back to even, when people would ask me about raising money, one of the things I always used to say was that RAB is attracted to TAC, and that's rich and bored is attracted to talented and crazy.
You're right about that.
So what's eventually going to happen is that people are going to be making choices about investing their time, and they're going to be looking for talented and crazy. They're going to be looking for something different. They're going to be looking for something cool, and they're going to be looking for something that they can tell their friends about that makes them look better.
Yeah.
So the more that we double down on our own ideas and own intellectual property, and the more that we make that about sharing and people talking about it, the more we're going to build those followings, but the more we're going to attract those curators. And if one of those curators starts sending out a top 10 list of these are the courses to take, all of a sudden we're in a completely different world than just selling our own thing.
That's brilliant. I think you're right about that. Do you think from the, because I totally relate to both sides of that, where you say like the bored and what is it?
Rich and bored and talented and crazy.
Rich and bored. Okay. Yeah. So, because that's how I buy. I don't buy a ton of art, but the art I do buy is like it really piques my interest. Like I can't make that or do that, or like I pay, I don't know, like $100 a year to be on, what is this? It's like this exclusive Neil Young app that you can't buy his music anywhere else except for in this app now, because he's crazy and I like music. So it super reminds me of that. One thing that comes to mind, I'm just curious, because you've played probably more in the arts end of things than I have, and the creative end even more than I have, is do you think that it's just going to get excessively harder to stand out in that, or is it just a trend that changes? So like, as an example, only from the technology world, like right now, TikTok's super hot, and like everybody's like, this is where you can get traffic, and everybody's playing in this new app, which is novel because it's 15-second videos or whatever. Do you think that we're always aggressively pushing the envelope to something even crazier, or do you think that things cycle and trend? Do you understand the question? Am I being clear?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I definitely do. I think that we're never going to lose our interest in novelty, right? And I think that's biological. I think, if there is something that doesn't kind of fit, we're going to look, right? I think, when you start to look at trends and you start to look at sort of how people get attracted to things, I think that how that thing's packaged and what it is not necessarily the whole picture. It's also all of the things around it, right? So if we start to look at like even TikTok, for example, right? There are people using that platform, but and being like, this is the next big thing. But there were people using Periscope saying it was the next big thing.
Right. Exactly.
So the thing is, it's whether TikTok ends up being the thing or not, people will then start to figure out if it does stand out. Again, that market's going to become more saturated, and then it's going to be a question of like, who really is the TikTok expert, right? Like who's spending all their time, in that platform, sort of making things happen, and who is the curator who tells us whether or not we should be on TikTok, or we should be, at the LinkedIn, or we should be on the Book of Faces, or, any of these other social platforms, right? Like who's going to tell us where we're going to go? So I think that it's not a matter of like, we're always going to just keep pushing the envelope necessarily. But I don't think we're ever going to have a time where I think it's the human spirit to explore outside of our current circle, right? I think it's natural. I think that's a natural thing. And I think that, another piece of this is we will eventually sort of go too far in different capacities. And when we go too far in a particular industry, people will start to pull back, but they won't stop innovating. Right. And I mean, you can see it across the board where, certain shows, like even if you look at entertainment and television, right? Certain shows push the envelope, right? And they kept pushing the envelope. And there are certain points where certain shows push the envelope too far, and then they just don't really appeal to people anymore. Right? Sometimes they jump the shark, right? Where it's just like, I stopped watching The Walking Dead right? Because there's no suspense anymore, right? It's just kind of like, okay, you're stuck in another massive place, and there's another, archetypal villain, trying to take over your horde of people, and I think somebody will die this season, right? But then there's also, shows where they knew where to, how far to push and then where to stop, right? Breaking Bad is a perfect example. Breaking Bad always kept you on edge.
Yep.
And Breaking Bad satisfied with the way it concluded for many, many people. Mm-hmm. As well as, and right now I'm watching Better Call Saul because of course, right? And it is, following in that model, right? Where it's pushing the envelope just enough, right? It's pushing and it's creating just enough tension, but it's not going so far that I'm like, I can't, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like last episode of Dexter, ridiculous, right? Like that kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. Because as a creative, or being a creator, sometimes I feel like we have to just keep pushing farther and farther, keep doing the next extreme thing. So that's helpful to think it through that way, because I think you're right. I think it's about the right amount of tension. And when you master that, then you can produce year after year after year after year, and keep putting something out there that, catches people's curiosity enough and interest, and it's shareable and it has all those elements, but you didn't break it. You didn't go too far, become unbelievable or become so gross or weird that it's, you didn't push outside those boundaries. And that's super interesting. And those are good examples too. Cause I agree. I mean, Breaking Bad, I'm actually rewatching that because I'm kind of out of other things to watch right now, and it's just phenomenal. It's still good. I know what's going to happen, and it's still good. So
yeah, it's so well done, and there is an exercise that I recommend for people based on Breaking Bad, where a lot of the time what they would do is they would create that opening scene where basically you had no idea what was going on.
Yep.
And they wouldn't pay off that opening scene until the middle of the show. Yep. Because from a rating standpoint, a rating doesn't count until you've watched the show through the middle.
Yep. Yeah.
So I often tell people, if you're trying to innovate and you're trying to create something new, don't try to start from the very beginning. Start from something kind of ridiculous and then try to write yourself to the payoff. I promise you'll come up with something way out there, and it'll really, really encourage your creativity.
Yeah, you're totally right. That's a great creative process and definitely a great writing process, because I mean that's how all great writing I think starts in the thick of it, and then you work your way up to it. So yeah, you're right. They do that extremely well on that show.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I really have enjoyed just talking through the stuff, Michael, because you put a ton of thought into it, and I love when anybody can break things down into a simple, rememberable format, which you've thoroughly mastered. So, how can people connect with you and work with you, and what kind of things are you looking for right now?
Sure. So I have a podcast myself called Access to Anyone, and talk to people about all sorts of different relationship building principles. I've been doing over the past couple of weeks, I've been doing a solo series just kind of talking about how I'm dealing with everything, and sort of walking people through some of the things that I found that have been really helpful and useful. The website for the company is just smallpondenterprises.com, and they can go there. If you go on there, I have a daily email that I write riffing on a lot of these ideas and these concepts. And I'm very much I'm all over the social world. So if you reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter or the Book of Faces or any of those places, I'm out there and happy to be helpful in whatever ways I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Michael. We'll definitely have you back on, and stay safe. And just again, thank you for sharing everything today. It was really valuable.
You've been listening to Today's Business Leaders with Gabe Arnold. Remember to subscribe on iTunes. For more information, visit todaysbusinessleaders.com.